Yes, love's a secret weapon. Yeah!
Hi, I'm Donna Loren.
And I'm Dr. Adam Gerace.
And you are listening to Love's a Secret Weapon podcast.
Chapter 20, Eloquent, Part 6.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. Eloquent, eloquent. Why should I not speak eloquent with you? Why should I not speak eloquent with you? Why should I not speak eloquent with you? Sugar mama, why should I not speak eloquent with you? 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 Sugar mama, why should I not speak eloquent with you? Why should I not speak eloquent with you? Why should I not speak eloquent with you? Sugar mama, why should I not speak eloquent with you? Why should I not speak eloquent with you? I allow my full power of sexual presence.
use your imagination, suspend disbelief, to take you to Hawaii.
That's right, because the original Dr. Pepper girl, actress Donna Loren, is now residing in Hawaii, where she is happily enjoying the life of a fashion designer.
You know that she's the original Dr. Pepper girl?
I think that's what I just said.
Yeah, I'm impressed by that. I want to meet her. Modeling Donna's designs tonight, some people that are not so hard to look at. Models from Auto and the cast of Sunset Beach.
Ladies and gentlemen, ADASA. Woohoo!
Even though Waimea, also known as Kemuela, is a very small town with a population of under 10,000 people, like every town, there's an industrial business side and a commercial business side. Our building was in the industrial side, and for a maximum shopping experience, we found a space opened in the commercial side. It was next to a magnet restaurant, Merriman's, that attracted people from the resorts. At the time, I made an agreement with Donald Pliner for him to custom sandals with my fabric to match my dress collection. That was a very successful collection for me. We were being romanced by the leasing director of the Hilton Hawaiian Village in Honolulu. On our way to visit her, we stopped by our Merriman location on our way out of town. There was a platinum blonde, very New York-looking woman milling around our store with a couple of other people at her side when we walked in. 9/11 had just occurred, and she had been stranded on the island. While she was waiting for the airport to loosen up their security, she took the opportunity to explore. We introduced ourselves to her, and she responded with, "I'm one of the fashion editors of Lucky Magazine. Your boutique is spot on. We'd like an article on you." What a coup! Here she was, held hostage by the tragedy in her native city, showering us with this blessing. I clearly remember this was only 4 days after the incident and the first day that the airports were open. We thanked her and went on our way to Honolulu. The streets of Honolulu were a ghost town after 9/11. In one way, we could imagine how it felt to be in paradise without millions of people all around. But the truth was that we were living in the shadow of the terrorist attack. You can never escape reality, even on an island. We met with the leasing director at the Hilton Hawaiian Village, Elvis's favorite place to stay. She explained to us that they were looking for a business to fill a space in their village where they have over 90 merchants. This was an empty, freestanding building between Louis Vuitton and Tiffany. Whoa! This is a move up. Are we ready for something like this? Jared and I didn't give them an answer right away. Like everyone, we're feeling the trauma of what had just happened in New York, Arlington, and Pennsylvania. It would also mean a dramatic change in our lifestyle and a possible move to Honolulu. Our friend had a studio apartment in the Diamond Head Beach Hotel. She let us stay in on our initial visit. Well, we kind of fell in love with the building and its location directly by Diamond Head. Following our first visit, while we were debating whether this change was the best for us, we ended up staying in a different unit, number 1201, right on the ocean. Could be serendipity that this unit was for sale at a price we could afford, which moved us in a direction that tipped the scale. All businesses were suffering at the time, so we really had to search our souls if we were willing to take this enormous chance. The Hilton Hotel called an emergency meeting for all of the merchants and invited us to be part of it as prospective clients. We all sat in a ballroom, listening to the president of the Hilton Hawaiian Village. He actually singled us out and gave us the opportunity to decline. In that moment, a surge of courage soared through both of us, and we knew we had to do it. Our quiet words to each other were, "If we can make it now, we can make it any time." That sealed the deal, and we bought the apartment. We opened ADASA at the Hilton Hawaiian Village in November on the day after Thanksgiving.
And with her, our star designer, Miss Donna Loren from Hawaii. ADASA.
What an interesting period that you're speaking about, Donna, that this decision to take a leap into a new part of your business, but reminding us all of that time in 2001 of 9/11 that's now been, what is it? I'm trying to count, 22 years?
That's right. Almost.
Almost 22 years. And I think many of us remember what that experience was like. Those of us who lived it have very indelible memories of it. Even here in Australia, I remember what it felt like, albeit we were almost a world away from where it had occurred. It's something that takes you right back there. So when you're talking about that idea of the streets being a ghost town and weren't quite sure what was going to happen, where the world was going to be, I think a lot of people listening who did experience it will remember that, and those who didn't might get a bit of a window into that experience.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, Adam, I'm also correlating it to, I think, anyone who was alive the day that President Kennedy was assassinated remembers precisely where they were and, how it affected them and who they were with. Just very provocative experiences. And, they touch you deeply emotionally, and it's an assault on your own person as well as on an entire culture. And so I was just wandering around my 5 acres in North Kohala on the Big Island. And Jimmy Lawrence and his daughter Leah had moved into the apartment over the garage, and he became our caretaker. And she was still going to school as a teenager and doing some modeling for me because she was a very tall, slender, blonde beauty. And so Leah was the one came out of her apartment and came into the backyard and said, "You're not going to believe what just happened." Because they were watching the news.
Yeah.
And I think it was around Hawaii time. It was around 8 or 8:30 in the morning. And I was just out in the garden picking vegetables or something, and came in the house and told Jared, to turn on the television so we could see what was going on. And I recall, the first building, the first tower, and then I saw the plane go into the second tower, and I saw the whole tragedy. And there was a chef that I don't recall his name, but he had an office. No, his restaurant was in the first tower. He had come down to the street level to get some coffee while his staff was upstairs preparing for the day. And his life was spared because of that. And that was my first impression of the horror. And then kind of like, as you said, just the shock, just the shock. And living on an island in a pretty idyllic, environment with, beautiful flowers and, just living in the tropics. It's very otherworldly. So to have that kind of something that affects you, it really altered your disposition. It just rang through your whole nervous system. Is that what happened to you?
I think very much so. That here it was late at night, so maybe 9:30, 10:30 at night, something like that. And I was studying for an exam because I was in university. I was in my second year of university, and someone texted me and said, turn on the TV. The tower has been hit. And so you turn it on and you see what's happened. And I think it's just something that, perhaps putting ourselves back into that mind space, that it just wasn't something that you fathomed, that this idea that while it unfolded pretty quickly as to what it was, that this had been something deliberate, it hadn't been an accident. It just wasn't something in your way of thinking that you could think that was the case, that this could happen in New York. And so, like you, I sort of very quickly turned on the different channels. I had the American channels because I had cable TV, and just flicking between them and seeing what was unfolding so quickly. And like you, I'm sure I saw that the second tower, albeit I think we've spoken about this before, that idea that some of these, I think they're called flashbulb memories, these kind of experiences that a whole lot of people experience, such as JFK's assassination or 9/11 or Princess Diana or events like that. And sometimes we might misremember what we saw, and did I see it or did I see it on a replay? But either way, I was definitely watching unfold, people running across the bridge, and I just remember the people's shoes just kind of being seen. Do you remember that?
Not as clearly as you do, but just this rush, this panic. How could you run fast enough to get away from?
Well,
from that?
yeah, absolutely. And I think just in those weeks that follow, which you sort of talk about, that things were very different. And, obviously here, like I said, was a world away, but you still felt that tenseness that there were other potential attacks going on. I remember the anthrax scares, and I remember being on buses, and you'd feel very ill at ease, or even on a plane when you finally took a plane again. For whatever reason, just that unease that you did feel. But it was a very strange time. I think you capture that well.
I think what you're saying is of course you were born in the 80s?
Yeah, early 80s.
Early 80s.
Yeah.
It was quite a different world that I grew up in, and there was a lot of fear, I have to admit. But then in the 60s, there was this confluence of, elation all the time, and, celebration of life, and a lot of innovation. And it lasted even through the, all of the murders and the wars going on. There was still some sort of hopefulness. But I think by the turn of the century, which started out for me, I remember, I don't know if I talked about this, but I remember on January 1st, change of the millennium, that I had this satellite in my backyard to pick up signals, and I wasn't getting very many stations, but one of them happened to be called the Wisdom Channel.
Great.
So the morning of the 1st was Dalai Lama talking about equanimity. And of course, the night before, Jared and I decided to stand out in our yard among the circle of palms just a minute after midnight and exchange our vows.
Right.
And and then that day it was a full moon on January 1st, and he drove me up to the top of the Mauna Kea, which at 9,000 feet the oxygen level was still okay. I was awake, but then by the time we got to 14,000 feet, where all the observatories were, I passed out.
Oh wow.
But on the way up, I saw the full moon rising in the indigo sky, and the sunset to my right, going up this tall mountain of the Mauna Kea, and then waking up as, thank God, Jared, had the coherence to be able to drive up that elevation and then come back down. And you can imagine all the scientists that go there to work, what they have to adapt to.
Just a little bit woozy, some of the discoveries might be a little bit suspect, but
that's why they see.
Yes, exactly.
Well, it was absolutely unforgettable. So the turning of the millennium seemed to be quite hopeful. And then of course the political situation took a turn for the worse, and and just the idea of fear. I think with 9/11, that just put it in like an anchor. And because that's pretty much, the way that the world's been functioning is on fear. And that's why, the powerful can maintain their power based on the masses being in fear. So it's interesting that you explained your experience.
It's such a beautiful morning. Have we learned our lesson, or would we do it all again? Would we keep on second guessing what's as plain as anything? I know they say we had it coming, but I've seen some things I never thought I'd see in my life. All the little reasons that get me down, they mean nothing. I fear the good times may be gone forever. Will we cry? Will we laugh? Will this moment be our last? Will we hate or refuse? Will we love? What will we choose? Oh, when will we learn? 'Cause we know it all along. Will we keep on reliving September? Or will we learn? September the 11th, I did what I've always done.
Again, I don't know. I have this kind of, what do you call this, dual consciousness of what's going on that might be so tragic, and still a sense of my crazy cockeyed optimism inside me.
Yeah.
Which on day 4 on the Big Island, I went to my atelier and boutique, and there was a woman snooping around.
Yeah.
And she looked very interesting. She looked like a tourist. You could kind of tell the local people who lived there from the tourists. And then she announces that she's the fashion editor of Lucky magazine and that she wanted to do an article on us.
Yeah.
And one thing led to another. Then someone from the Hilton Hotel on Oahu in Honolulu shows up and invites us to come over and see this vacancy on their property. They had literally a village of 90 vendors and just a gigantic hotel with lots of towers, and that's where Elvis used to stay.
Yeah. Had you stayed there before?
Oh no, I'm a boutique girl. So literally it didn't take long. I mean, we had a friend that did have a place near Diamond Head.
Yeah.
And she had a little kind of a studio apartment that we stayed in the first time we were there. Well, that building was the original Holiday Inn, built in 1959.
Right. Yeah.
And it was in the shape of a pyramid.
Very awesome.
And in our, ultimately in our apartment, that's when you made contact with Jared and I.
Right.
And
right.
you were in university,
Yep.
and and we got together through the internet,
Yep.
and blossomed our friendship. Well, so we the second time we came over, because the Hilton Hotel was quite enthusiastically trying to engage us. And this was, I've forgotten this. Well, it was before 9/11, obviously. But so it was a 14-story building.
Yeah.
And the second time we were there, we stayed in a unit called 1201, and was right at the edge of the ocean. And, you walked out on the balcony and looked over, and you could see the fish swimming by. In fact, I learned the name of the Hawaiian fish, Homo homo nuku nuku apua'a.
Try saying that 5 times in a row.
And literally, it's quite a large tropical fish that's the state fish of Hawaii. And you could see it from our 12th story balcony.
Tremendous. How big are we talking then? Is this fish?
Oh, not quite 2 feet.
Wow. Yeah.
It was quite a sizable tropical fish.
Yeah.
And and it was kind of round. So, it wasn't a slender. So, a real joy. And we ended up finding out that each one of these units that were being rented as a hotel were being converted into condos.
Right.
And so the price was right, and Jared and I decided to invest, and so we purchased 1201 and called that home base. Well, that was kind of probably the end of summer, and then the commitment came when all of the 90 vendors were invited, and we had not signed yet. But in this big ballroom, all of the vendors were there, and the CEO of the Hilton, was giving everyone the opportunity to exit.
Wow, that's amazing when you think about it. And some of, as you said, some of the high-end stores that were involved there, where you were going to be sandwiched between two of them. And
I was going to be between Louis Vuitton and Tiffany.
Yeah.
And it was a freestanding building, which would give me a lot of windows and, showcase windows.
Yeah.
And so something, Jared and I looked at each other, and that hopefulness just came through all of this kind of tragedy. And we decided if we could do it now, we could do it anytime. And so we decided to go for it. And we signed our contract
at the end of 2001. And I mean, this seems like a big change. That this had been several years of you starting to design, as you've spoken about in our episodes, starting to design for yourself, and then gradually developing collections, and then opening retail. But this seems like quite a big jump, both in terms of it's on a different island to where you live. It's in a really amped up space.
It's a whirlwind.
Yeah.
And as we get into, the story, one of the Hilton girls used to be a regular visitor to her hotel, and discovered that she liked some of the merchandise that we carried, and so she was a regular, and of course tourism turned on to the celebrity aspect of who would come to see us. And then there was a fellow who had a Sunday afternoon television show in Hawaii called Hawaiian Moving Company. And they did like a half an hour special on myself and, who I had been. And before I knew it, I would walk down the sidewalk in Waikiki, and people would say hello, and they would know who I am. And it was quite friendly and quite lovely for those 5 years that was happening there. And it's always nice when you're not from a place to feel like you belong, especially me that has this stigma of not feeling like I belong to my family. And then suddenly I move into Honolulu and Waikiki, and people are embracing Jared and I, and what we're doing, and who we were and who we are. And it was just very, very aloha.
Yeah, and because I was going to say that, because you wouldn't necessarily think that sometimes when people think of Honolulu, they think of this, it's much more bigger, much more touristy. But you did feel that sense of belonging there.
Oh yes. Oh, where we bought the apartment by Diamond Head, it was about a half a mile or so walk into Waikiki. There was a park called Queen Kailani Park, and the street was King Kalakaua, and that was her king when there was a kingdom in Hawaii. And that park was their summer palace. And our apartment was right across the street from this beautiful park with these gorgeous shower trees and these other trees that, the name is escaping me, but they creaked in the wind like an old floorboard that you step on in the wind. It was quite amazing. And you could feel the carriages, when you're walking down the lane in between these trees, you could feel the carriages that the queen and king were riding on in their summer palace. So we loved walking in Honolulu and Waikiki, and then just so many well, you're walking right along the ocean and people are getting married, or, or there's homeless people that say hello, and, and the temperature is so even that, every day you listen to the news and it's 88, 88, 88, 88. And the night temperature is 78, 78, with very, very rare variations
of it. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. It just like every Friday night there would be an open air theater that sat like 1,500 people, and vendors would come, and the mayor of the town would be there, and it was just quite friendly when we were there those 5 years. and across from the zoo was the Shell, which was the amphitheater for the major entertainers. In our apartment, if our windows were open, we could hear Bonnie Raitt or the Casimiro brothers, or Jack Johnson, or
not half bad.
and across the street from the Shell was the Honolulu Zoo, and every day, if we did not walk and we drove past where the giraffes lived, and so the giraffes would wander up to a fence by the trees, and they had nice little roaming areas. that was our life there, and so we found it was really an extension of family. And then one of my really great friends that I have a sisterhood with, that I spoke about, her name is Keiko, and she had run for mayor of the Big Island at one point.
Yeah.
She lived in Honolulu at the time, in this cute little town called Kaimuki, and that wasn't far from where we lived. So I had extended family as well. So it was just amazing. And then anyone that we worked with, our manager was just wonderful. Her name was Allison, and she knew all our products. She knew how to handle the clients. She knew how to handle the staff of salespeople, and she took good care of everything. And, it was just quite an interesting time.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about in our new chapters. We'll talk a lot more about that, and reveal the Hilton sister who was coming to see her hotel. I love that we call it her hotel. It is her hotel. But just to mention Keiko Bonk, because you did mention her previously, that you helped design a campaign wardrobe for her when she was running. But she's quite an impressive person. So she
was always very influential in government.
Mm-hmm.
She worked on city councils, and her family was a very foundational family in Hawaii. Her father was a surveyor, responsible for the main roads and tunnels in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And her mother was a classically trained potter that was always being shown in the Honolulu Academy, which was the museum in Honolulu. And so she came from a prominent family, not a high society, it wasn't royalty, but very politically and community oriented, and she still is.
Right, and she's also an artist from what I remember as well.
And an artist, definitely, because at one point when she did a New York stint for, I think, about 10 years, and collaborated with artists of that time, and I think was kind of like part of the Beat generation.
Right, yeah, fantastic.
But just a real salt of the earth person. And she's still, I think she has a band, because she's a rocker. She's
great.
Like when she was campaigning, she was out rocking at night. That was her reputation, that you could find her singing in clubs with her band, and her band was called the Monkey Wrench Club.
That's great.
I know.
I love these people who have multiple and varying interests. It's something to aspire to and to admire.
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah, diversity. Like they say, there's never a dull moment when you do what you love to do, and usually do more than one thing. So, Right?
Well, I think that leads in quite well to our next fan guest, because as became apparent in our conversation, Donna, this is someone who does a lot of different things and is very busy and very, I guess, entrepreneurial. So we had a really great time speaking to our fan guest. And who was that, Donna?
This is Leticia, and she is a woman of empowerment.
Well, Love's a Secret Weapon community, please welcome our latest fan guest. With us, we have journalist, author, and historian, Leticia Lopez. Such a pleasure to have you with us, because we're kind of turning the tables a little bit, that you have previously interviewed Donna as part of your writing work. And today we're kind of not interviewing, but we're going to have a conversation with you.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much, Adam and Donna. It's such a wonderful pleasure to be with you both. And like you've said, I'm a historian, I'm a journalist, and a couple years ago I was able to interview the lovely Donna, and like now to just have that opportunity to talk with her again, and it's just wonderful. And I'm so glad to be talking with the both of you and for being here.
Remind us, sweetheart, you're the flower in our garden today. With the magazine that you were doing the article about me in?
Yeah, so that was for Rebeat magazine. It was an online publication that was specifically about the 1960s. It was about music, fashion, about movies, and I began working there as a contributing writer because I had this background in journalism, and I was always fascinated with the 1960s. So being able to contribute to the publication was just one of my dreams that was able to be accomplished. And of course, having the opportunity to interview you during the year that you released your book, Pop 60s, was an incredible and fantastic moment for me as a writer and both as a 1960s fan.
Oh, well, I recall having a lovely conversation with you, and I look forward to picking up where we left off and maybe even going a bit broader and deeper into your life and getting to know you a little better. First, I want to wait a minute. Where are you again?
I'm in California. I'm in the Central Valley.
You and your mom. So do you live with your mother?
Yes, I still live with both of my parents. I was born and raised in Central Valley of California, and ever since I graduated from high school, I immediately went on to college. At the time, I was still kind of debating what I wanted to major in, but they were very supportive in allowing me to continue my education and helping me decide what career I wanted to go into. And, since then, they just offered so much love, support, and, whether it be like receiving me each day after a long day of studying or like doing research. And, that my mom was always welcoming me with a home cooked meal and, always being there with me to have conversations about school, like whether I was stressed out or like even those moments, when you're trying to get your life together as a 18-year-old, a 19-year-old, or even into your early 20s. Like she was always there giving me feedback and encouragement to never give up no matter how hard the road was. So she's been a very supportive mother, and I still get to live with her and live with both of my parents actually. And there were times where I wanted to move out because like as you're growing and you're becoming an old adult, you kind of want to go on your own and stuff. But they have offered so much to me emotionally and supportive, and that they kind of I'm one of the two daughters that they have. So they really love me a lot, and I love them back too. So we just want to keep living together as long as they continue to let me in their house, but
That's incredible.
but they allow me to grow as a person as well. They're not always like behind trying to keep me inside the house or stuff like that. So
yeah, that's I think that's really interesting you say that, because sometimes, and not meaning to do it, but we can always be a bit stuck in some of those roles that we can be seen as always the child. And it sounds like you've been able to grow as you've grown up. You've been able to grow into a different relationship with your parents that is both as adults and a very supportive one. So it's interesting, Leticia, you were reminding me when you were talking about those long days of studying or researching, because what you do as a journalist and a researcher, researching a lot of your work in the 60s, it's often, I relate to this because it's often you're sitting in front of a computer all day and you're looking up old articles or you're doing whatever, and it can be a little bit solitary. Do you find that, or?
Yeah, absolutely. There were many moments where when I was first starting out where I didn't have much of a social life just because I was so willing to learn, because as a journalist or as a historian, you have to enjoy learning, whether it be reading books or talking to other people, other researchers, and, watching a bunch of documentaries. So you do have to spend a lot of time with yourself and kind of like analyze those works or the thesis or whatever it is you're reading or researching. And it can be very, very solitary, but like in any other job or any career, you have to take those breaks so that you can, have time for yourself and enjoy, whether it be outside or whether it be going at the local record store or going out for a cup of coffee. It's always nice because it refreshes your mind and it refreshes you, even if going out with your friends and then for an hour or so and then getting back to that work, because it can get a little bit kind of lonely, because you're surrounded by books and documents rather than people.
That's so true, isn't it? And I'm sure Donna's interested in this. Is what drew you to journalism, and then what sort of drew you to your interest in particularly the 1960s and mid-century?
Yeah, that's a very interesting story because when I first started high school, I was a freshman and, I was always this very, very shy person. I was never really outspoken. I was never like the life of the party or like the popular girl or anything. So the academics were not just something that I had to do based for school, but it was also a type of escape for me because, we have a variety of art, whether it be they taught us how to paint or how to write, whether it be creative writing like poetry or essays. And then, of course, we have music. And English was one of the ways where it didn't feel like a school subject. It felt like something that I could be interested outside of school. And reading became such a huge part because when I was growing up, reading was always so boring. Why do we have to do it, right? And when I entered high school, we started to read a lot of literature and like poetry, like Robert Frost and a bunch of great authors. And that's when I realized writing is something that I really enjoy, whether it's reading other people's work or writing my own thing, trying to be creative with poetry or writing short stories. And journalism kind of sprouted from that because journalism allowed me to not only read about other people, but to be a curious mind and develop questions that probably other historians or journalists or other people hadn't thought about. I would have that ability to talk with people and like get those answers or cover an event and be able to transport readers. Taught us that we needed to learn from the past in order to enjoy the present, and then also enjoy the present so that you could later on think of the future. But the future wouldn't be the main focus because you want to focus on the present while learning from the past so that you won't do any mistakes while you're in the present. So, so history really, really taught me a lot about Elvis Presley because I was a huge Elvis Presley fan when I was age 13. And being in high school, I learned so much about him and like how rock and roll was this huge counterculture thing because it gave teenagers their own identity, their own their own fashion, their own music genre, their own way to express themselves and be themselves without listening to the older artists that their parents were listening to. And, the 1960s was a very juxtaposition era where you got all this great music, this great fashion, great cinematography, but you also have the war and racism. And what really caught my attention about the 1960s was that the young generation was basically the one in control of trying to be against the war, be against racism, be against segregation, and just being very loving humans and seeking peace and being able to do something that was going to impact future generations, but that was also going to help them at that moment, at that time, whether it be, celebrating the first Earth Day in the early 70s, or being outspoken and activist against racism, or against those people who were like very masochistic and like saying that the women should be in their home. And it was just an era where there was good times and there was bad times, but those bad times were able to bring people together to create a sensitivity and awareness of where we should be going in the next 20, 40, 50 years. And, some of those social causes and political things have coming up today. And, it's still something that we still have to work and strive for in order to make a place that's safe and equal for everyone. And so that's kind of why.
Wait a minute. Listen, honey, I think that you have the capabilities of running for an office in your district. You have a tremendous voice for the people, and as a journalist, with the Journalist Foundation, you have such a wonderful perspective. Have you ever considered doing anything like that for the public?
Oh, that's very interesting. I haven't thought about it, but I always try to be somebody who is very vocal in my city or in my county, whether it be for women's rights, for animal rights, for awareness about the earth and our global climate. But the politics of it, I've never actually thought about that.
Well, just a moment. Dr. Adam, I'm going to go off into a subject that's near and dear to my heart, and that is healthy soil. And I would presume that in Central California, there's a major agricultural community.
Yes, that's true.
And that, sources of water, clean water, and healthy soil are vanishing. And that part of, shall we say, a transformational energy that's occurring on planet Earth is about going, and I'm going to say this, and now I can apply history, going back to the kind of farming that holds the land sacred. And that agriculture, during our lifetimes, but my entire lifetime has been one of depleting the soil using chemical fertilizers. And now we have GMO seeds and all this manipulation. But you're in a district, you're in a part of the country, and you're in a state that would support this movement toward more organic farming, more regenerative farming. That whole subject is really critical for where you live, I believe.
Yes, absolutely.
It's I was just going to say, I know Donna and I, we've spoken about this before, but yeah, that whole idea that for decades, so much of what was spoken about or debated or lived through in the 60s, I think, to take the garden metaphor, kind of lied dormant for a long time afterwards. And and now we're coming back to a lot of those issues where we have depleted the environment over decades. And
yes, well, I think that
to add to what you're saying, Adam, and also what you have said, Leticia, is that corruption and distortion in people's minds that come from distorted egos of power, power struggles, that, have come to, kind of an epic peak today. And it's like reaching the summit of the mountain, and connecting with the source of all, all that is, that more wisdom is coming in, because we know that that's a dead end. And the corruption has been, how can I split an atom? How can I feed the world? How can I control this, control that? And that whole philosophy permeates every single aspect of our lives for my entire life. So it started in 1941, with the splitting of the atom, and then creating DDT during World War II. From, I think it was, in the German side, but however these are authenticated, those two elements have totally changed, the way that this earth is trying to survive and all life on it. So getting back, to your participation, honey, I think you start with getting on a city council and then seeing, how far you want to go and how much time you have to devote to it. But I mean, you certainly have what it takes, it sounds to me.
That's a very exciting thing that you might have not thought about. I really liked or found it really interesting what you were saying, Leticia, about this idea of that nuance of the 60s. That I think I love that era as well. As our listeners know, I didn't grow up in that era, but sometimes I guess we or people can talk about this whole idea of how idyllic the 60s was and how wonderful and how they wish they lived there now. And what I sort of really related to when you were speaking is this idea of that juxtaposition or that nuance. There was so many wonderful things, as we've spoken about, as Donna's been able to share with our listeners over, the last 60 plus episodes we've done of this podcast. But then there was so much, in terms of women's rights, in terms of minority rights, that were not necessarily where they should have been. Sometimes I say, I'd love to, it's a bit of a throwaway comment, I'd love to live in the 60s. And my partner says, if we were living in the 60s, we would not probably be living together. We would probably have to hide. All sorts of things. So I just, I really liked what you were saying there about that complexity, because I think we want to take the best of that decade, but we also want to see it for the bits where it fell short as well.
And may I also bring up, going back to what you were saying, both of you were talking about the loneliness aspect of being a writer. And I've totally related to that, as well as, anytime you hear a great author and you see the ink stains on their fingers and whatever, and the bottles of whiskey and the and the ashtrays that are overflowing, and and the lack of relationships. But yes, I think that great authors, just like a Jack Kerouac, On the Road, for an example. When I was reading that, I had a virtual experience because this man gave me his life experience. And I can't imagine him being lonely putting that life experience down on paper. It's just a tremendous effort. So from my perspective, something that you read that touches you comes from someone who may be alone in solitude, but actually, when you really think about it, they're having a virtual experience that they're just, documenting. And I know that's what happens to me. And think about it. Just think about it. Yes, you're alone, but are you?
That's really interesting, isn't it? I don't know about your process, but that's so true. It's almost like when you're drawing on something else, whether it's characters, whether it's writing about a particular situation, you are in some ways living it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when the opportunity to cover art galleries or like this most recent article that I did was on a mural in San Francisco, a 1960s icon in San Francisco called Carol Doda. She was at the Condor Club. You know, she was the first female stripper who launched this sensation of topless dancing around the world. And,
Right.
you know, I might spend time, you know, doing the research, whether it was reading old newspaper articles about Carol Doda or like watching some of the old documentaries that have been made about her. But, you know, I was able to attend the opening reception, and, you know, I wasn't lonely anymore because I was able to attend the event, and I got to perceive the excitement of the people who were there unveiling of the mural, family of the artist or family and old friends of Carol speak about their experiences knowing her or living up in San Francisco and being able to pass by the Condor Club in the 60s, you know? So you may feel lonely during the process of writing and the research, but when you cover events like that, or if you're writing a book on a certain subject or era, you get to talk to those people, and your mind and your life gets more fulfilling because you learn about other people's perspectives, other people's life stories, and you're able to, or you maybe thought that you had nothing in common, but, you know, something or other, how you grew up or like in what city you visited, and like they happen to be living in that same city now and stuff like that. So it's really, it's an interesting job position because, you know, afterwards you get that fulfilling sensation of learning about other people and learning about their lives, and, you know, you connect with them in a personal level and in a career level as well because you're doing your job.
Wow. So you're reaffirming. I mean, if I lived in the state of California, I would vote for you. I mean, seriously, you know, honey, you have both ends covered. You have the ability to express yourself and communicate, you know, so that through your writing, you know, people can read your thoughts and your information, as well as adding the other dimensions of meeting these people and getting to know them and listening to them and experiencing them and relating to them. And that's a very interesting. Now, you're saying her name is Carol Doda. Is that her real name?
Yes, that's her real name.
Okay. Right. And what did she go by?
She went by Carol Doda. It was just her real name that she used on her working at the Condor Club. She didn't use no stage name, no nothing. And the funny and curious thing was that besides becoming like this huge sensation for being a topless dancer in San Francisco and like launching this whole topless dancer phenomenon, was that she later began starring in a few like minor roles for movies, and one of them was in The Monkey's Head, the 1960s film, and she played Sally Silicone, and she was the supposed like girlfriend of Mike Nesmith in the film, where he is kind of dressed up like that kind of gangster, like 1940s gangster, and she's like his gangster baby, his girlfriend, you know. And it's pretty funny to see her there, and, you know, she seems like a very shy person. And, you know, when I spoke to some of her old friends in San Francisco during the event, they were saying like, oh, she was one of the most shy people, and she was very sweet and caring, but once she got on stage, that shyness and everything went away. And so, you know, I was able to watch that movie Head, and seeing her there, like, she's very stunning. And, you know, the name Sally Silicone was because she got breast implants during the 1960s when they weren't a huge thing yet as they are now, and so she became famous for that as well.
Is she still alive?
No, she passed away in 2015.
I see.
Right. And I was just looking up, because I do this sometimes when we're talking to get a bit of context, and I just came across the New York Times obituary, and like you're saying, that she did undertake these procedures at a time when they weren't necessarily what they are now. Yes, safe. And it says that some of the procedures have since been banned. But this is quite cute that it says, but Miss Doda, who began every day with a bowl of Wheaties, said she suffered no health complications. So you've got to have your Wheaties in the morning, no matter what, whether you're a dancer at the Condor Club or wherever else. Quite cute.
That's
really,
hysterical.
Show business is very, very hard. You have to be on your toes all the time.
There's nudity in your show.
Now, wait a minute, I want to tell you something. There's nudity in my show, but it's done tastefully. Like a nude painting. It has taste.
Let's start at the beginning. Carol Doda was a cocktail waitress. She'd amuse the customers by getting up on the piano and dancing. Then the club's publicity agent, Davy Rosenberg, got the idea that would make history.
Can you spot what's missing?
Created by a designer named Rudy Gernreich. He bought one for Carol.
And I said, great, new costume.
Topless Entertainment was born.
Come on, everybody! Come on in! Bobby's gonna show you how to do the swim!
Can we describe your act at the Condor?
Oh, it consisted of a piano and a body coming out of the ceiling on the piano with this wild rock and roll music.
Kinda like the monkey, kinda like the twist. Pretend you're in the water and you go like...
It's quite a fascinating story. I'm interested, Donna, maybe you could speak to this a little bit, because I think, Leticia, you've touched on this whole idea of particularly the woman's perspective and being a woman, whether it was in the 60s or now, and that unique voice that you would bring to your writing. But Donna, your thoughts on, this is a big subject, but as you being a young woman in the 60s, you could talk a little bit to that. I know that's a very big subject, but your perspective on it all.
Well, as you know, Dr. Adam, I used to have a column in some of the teen magazines called Let's Talk It Over. And it was more about, where I went and who I was with and that kind of thing. But I have to say that when I was traveling, especially in the Deep South for Dr. Pepper, that not that I could ever, or I ever wrote about it, but I recall distinctly being picked up by at the airport, being escorted in a police car through a very kind of rural section in the South, in Arkansas. And, it was a very, very, well, it was kind of like, when you see documentaries of the most impoverished parts of this country. And maybe that's why I was driven by a police officer to make me feel safe. But, and I was obviously chaperoned by my adopted father and a Dr. Pepper executive in the car with us. But for some reason, seeing the conditions of how people were living, I decided to speak up to the police officer. And it was very empowering, driving through this rural area where the road was, I remember it was kind of mounded and there were ditches on either side, I guess, to collect snow, or I have no idea. But perched up on the hills were these very, very shabby shacks. And, and then there was some sort of liquid flowing beside the house. And the police officer told me that these were like rivers of urine.
Wow.
So no, I never wrote about it per se, but I chose to talk to someone, let's say, of authority. And I think I made the Dr. Pepper executive uncomfortable. I certainly made my adopted father very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
All he wanted to do was have some business. And may I just insert something right now, because I'm looking out my living room window up the mountain, and which is filled with oak trees, and I see a deer nibbling on some oak, not that far from where I'm sitting inside my house. It's like a pastoral scene, and I just wanted to share that with you. It's amazing.
That sounds beautiful.
Yeah,
I love deer.
I do too, honey. So, so Adam, now you're getting into more like a Gloria Steinem territory where, she was, how do you say, not obsessed, but committed, to helping women become empowered. And, from her background as a young child whose mother was basically incapacitated mentally, that she became her caretaker. But it was, again, like, even though there was role reversal, Gloria and her mother had a loving relationship. And what happened is that her mother, before she got married and started having children, was actually beginning her career as a journalist.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when she started, when she became a mother, she completely abandoned her career. And yeah, I can relate to that.
Yes. Yeah.
And to be a full-time mother. But what happened is, that's different from me, is that she completely lost her identity. And Gloria was aware of that. And so when she became a journalist, she was literally picking up the pieces from where her mother left off.
That's so interesting, isn't it? That whole idea of, I guess, Gloria's awareness as well as what had come before her. And, Leticia, picking up on that, but have you had particular mentors with your writing, with the places you've worked, the publications you've worked for, whether they're women, whether they're men, that you feel have in some way mentored you as to what a career might look like in this area?
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course. I remember when I was first starting out, like almost 10 years ago, there was an author. She was a female author. Her name is Jennifer Niven, and I had first read about her work when I had gotten into reading and enjoying reading for fun. I began reading her books, and reading books from a woman's perspective was so much more interesting to me rather than reading from a men's perspective, just because I could relate so much more when a woman was writing about her personal life or creating a female character with similar projections or similar like lifestyle or situationships, whether it be relationships with your family, your parents, or romantic relationships. It was always much more interesting. And I remember reaching out to her via email and just thanking her for like writing about her memoirs and like what it was like growing up in the 80s, like being a teenage girl and deciding to be an author. And, I related so much. I related to Jennifer Niven's work because she wrote a memoir where she was about her teenage years and what it was like growing up, being somebody who wasn't that popular, and how she found writing to be like a way for her to escape her reality and, find out who she was as a person. And I remember feeling the same way during that time. And so I sent her an email and I thanked her like for the work that she had put out there in her books and in her memoirs and her fictional writing. And, I had no idea that she was going to respond back, and she did. And, it was one of those moments where you're kind of validated for who you are as a person, that it's okay to change who you want to be and to follow your dreams, whether it be being an artist, an actor, or let's say you want to be a pharmacist or a teacher. I felt very validated because writing was never seen as a good career choice. And I feel like for me, she validated me as a person and me as a creative who wanted to write, not to just find out about myself and like who I wanted to be, but also to help others discover themselves and discover what they liked, what they disliked, or like to, like I've said before, transport them to a different era, a different time zone. And that's kind of where my writing career took off, because she was able to mentor me, and she later on went to create an online magazine called Ger Magazine. And so I was one of the few writers that she contacted and said, "Do you want to be a part of it?" And I was like blown away, because at that time I was still in college, and I wasn't sure if writing was going to be a career that was going to be fulfilling, whether money wise or like fulfilling to me as a person. And she was really encouraging in how you could write for yourself, tell the stories you want other people to hear, or like tell the stories of others, like the minorities or people who you've never seen like written about. And it's always been a goal of mine as a writer to tell the stories of the people who are less seen, or the people who have made major contributions or small contributions to the world. And like nowadays everybody's so obsessed with like celebrities and like the newest lip injections or all of that. And when I focus on my subjects or the topics I want to write about, I always want to do it on people who are making impacts within the community, whether it be in San Francisco, in Sacramento, or bigger audiences like in Los Angeles. Or most of the people that I've interviewed had been crucial to creating a better world, whether it be with their music, with their art, whether with their books, if they've written books. And as a journalist, our goal is to give the voice to the voiceless, or to the people who are often left in the shadows and not focused the rest of the media or the rest of the world is looking into. And having somebody who mentored me early on and encouraged me to not give up my writing has really been an important aspect for who I become as a person and as a writer. And I always hope that my writing inspires people to be better people, whether it be being able to enjoy life or discover something new about themselves. Because even if we're no longer teenagers, or we're no longer in our 20s, like I feel like now that I'm in my 30s, I'm still growing as a person. I'm still growing as a writer. I'm growing as a historian. And sometimes throughout history, people have taught us that there's a certain age where you're supposed to know who you are or what you want to do. But I think we're always evolving, and to be better people and being more compassionate and more aware of the world around us and about others. So it's amazing. Yeah.
So true. Could not have, and we could not have said that any better, Donna, could we? That's the whole kind of mantra of this podcast, is that continuous learning. You're continually learning who you are, and hopefully getting more in touch with the real you, whatever you want to call that. Yeah, Donna, please take the floor.
I just feel like we're talking to like-minded, and these days it's there's so much polarization that it's so wonderful to be part of a community of people, unlimited to location, that are like-minded, and I see this movement growing and growing and expanding and connecting collectively, all over the planet, through writing and through music, through the arts, through education, through communication. And I was going to say that I wanted to ask you both, actually, what is your major method of writing? Do you write directly on a computer, or do you take notes? Do you handwrite? What do you do?
So I personally do a little bit of both, but I'm very old school that I like to write things down. So I'll mostly write down ideas in my notebook, or if I see an artist who is coming up with a new art exhibit, or if I'm out about in the town and seeing that a local artist is going to perform, or an organization is going to do a fundraiser, I always like to write things down, just because for me, I'm so used to writing rather than typing or typing notes on my phone, you know? It makes it more concrete to me to write my ideas down in pen or with pencil, because I know that I'm actually going to do them. And it just, yeah, and it definitely solidifies the aspect of it becoming a reality, because I know I won't forget, because my muscle memory had already jotted it down. So it's a lot more easier for me to write notes with pen or paper or a pencil rather than typing. So that's a really interesting question.
It is, and what you're talking about, there's in psychology, which is where I work, there is evidence that when we do write by hand, we do tend to take it in more. We do tend to process it more. It's just something which is interesting given the era that we're in now, where many, many people would be directly on the computer. But it does seem to be, particularly when you're writing about perhaps personal experiences, there's a lot of research into journaling and things like that, it actually probably is better to be doing it by pen and paper, just because we tend to think about it more and take it in more. But yeah, definitely an interesting question. I guess I'm probably similar to you, that I at least will always write notes by hand. I'll keep notebooks and things like that. I do, once I've got my idea, once I've paced out what I want to say and what I'm thinking I want to get across, I don't mind so much anymore using the computer, because I do like the ability to shift paragraphs around and to do that kind of editing. Whereas, with your writing, you've got to kind of put asterisks in and point it out. But for years, I couldn't work on a computer. It was all by hand. I used to travel a lot for work, and I'd get the hotel notepads that they'd give you, and I'd just have tons and tons from different hotels and do that. But I guess it's all sorts. I've spoken to writers before who still use the old legal, yellow legal pads. And Donna, I know you do a lot of longhand writing, but you probably also use your phone as well, I would.
Well, I think you're talking about a thought process, and it's so unusual. First of all, when you're using a particular writing utensil, something that, when you hold it, it kind of glides, and then the surface that you're writing on, the paper, if it's in a a journal or a diary or something like that, that I make sure that it can lie flat rather than having to wrestle with holding it open. But I've experienced so many times that putting pen to paper bypasses thought, that it's, something comes through, and it always surprises me, what comes out on the paper. It's not like, I'm thinking about it. It bypasses the thought. And there's a different kind of energy that finally ends up on the paper.
That's really interesting. It's almost, this flow. You're just in that moment, and it's not about thinking, it's just doing, and something else comes through. It's a very interesting idea. I'm thinking about, because you've worked for so many different publications and different audiences, I've got a couple of questions. The first one is, how does your work life look? Is it freelance? Are you on the staff of certain magazines, newspapers, internet publications, things like that? And then probably my next question would be advice to our audience, people who are interested in pursuing writing in whatever form. If you have any advice for how to start to make headway in that area, particularly in this sort of internet age. So, how does it look? Do you freelance? Do you become part of a staff? How does that work?
So I personally began freelancing. I think the journalists, some of my fellow colleagues and fellow staff writers all began as freelancers. because when you're to create that job for yourself and that image of a journalist, you kind of have to start off by knowing the editors and emailing them and seeing if they're open to work from contributors or new writers. And that's kind of how I began. It was just being a fan of certain publications and either reaching out to them via social media, or sometimes most of the publications have an email or a ask the editor email, and you can easily contact them through there and just give them compliments of what you like about their publication and topics that they, kind of introducing yourself as a writer and the type of work you do or the type of subjects or topics that you want to cover. And it's very important to yeah, of course, introduce yourselves. It's hard at first because, like, for me, when I was first starting out, I had no professional experience in the field except for like writing for my school newspaper or writing for a school publication, a school magazine. And it can be really hard and challenging because these publications rely most on their staff that they already have in their offices, in their workplace, and they're kind of not willing to accept new writers. And one of the best advice that I can give, and the same one that I've gotten, is to not give up. Receiving like 10 rejection letters in 1 month can be soul crushing and it does hurt, but just remember that it has nothing to do with how you think or how you write. It's just that maybe it's not the right time for that publication to appreciate your work. Like, it could be down the line, like in 2 months from now, or like a year from now. Like for some publications, for me, it took like 4 or 5 years for me to actually write for them because I had to learn so much of my writing process, the way I wanted my voice to be presented in my writing, if I wanted to be seen as a serious writer, or if I wanted to be seen as a writer who dealt more with like the fun things, like whether it be concerts or music or like fun stuff. So you kind of have to choose what kind of genre you want to write, whether it be poetry, whether it be about politics, or if you want to write about food. I know publication industry is really good because a lot of people are into like vegan, making healthier options for lunches or like for their kids. And there's publications who are always looking for writers who can do a little bit more on eco-friendly products as well. And so you kind of have to find out your niche as a writer and reach out to the publications that you like, that you enjoy, and that you want to contribute, and introduce yourself, introduce a little bit of your, if you get rejected once or twice, just know it's not labeling you as if you're a bad writer or a bad person. It just means you have to work a little bit harder and do a little bit more extra work, but it's all going to pay off. It's all going to pay off at the end, I promise.
And you know what, sweetheart, you're talking about your foundation because you have parents that have imparted that wonderful feeling of never giving up. And not everyone has that foundation. You are very fortunate to have it. And when one does not have, let's say in their childhood or in their family, that kind of support, what would you say to a person who has the conviction of their beliefs and the ambition to pursue their interest, but they really don't, they come from more of a hardship kind of a situation, that it much more so than you experienced?
Yeah, like you said, I'm very fortunate to have parents who have supported me along the way. And even though at first they were like, no, you shouldn't go into writing, like you said, some people might not have that same foundation. And I feel like sometimes when we don't have that foundation, whether it be like having the background in that specific art or hobby, it can get difficult. But when you don't have somebody like that, you always have to rely on yourself, because you don't have anybody else. You are your own supporter. You are your own believer. And even though you could be your worst critic, you want to make yourself aware of talents and the capacities that you have, because even when other people don't support you or they don't understand you, you have to be that cheerleader who keeps the wheels rolling, whether it be moving on or trying out something new, because sometimes the other people are not going to be there, or other people are not going to agree with you, or they're going to try to bring you down. And having that capacity to and what you want to do and your goals and your dreams is a very strong quality that a lot of people should come in contact with, because after all, we're the only things that we have and the only people that we have. So being a strong supporter of yourself and loving yourself, and if you want to change your career course, or if you want to try out a new hobby, go for it. Just be aware that you can try new things, and you could change, and you could be who you want to be without relying on anybody else. And that's the best advice that I could give, is just being your own cheerleader and being there for yourself, even when nobody else might seem to be on your same.
That is definitely an echo of Love's a Secret Weapon. First, love yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And emanate your love out into the universe. And
absolutely,
you will connect with so many hearts. If you don't have, per se, a family or anyone in your childhood that gives you that support, there are times that I even feel that those that have departed are still there in support of you. That if there's anyone, if you tune in, that there are endless possibilities of, even, I'm going to really go off, but when you are a loving spirit and you're in awe of life, and every time you see anything that you're like, what? That's amazing. That's another affirmation that you're not alone, and and that you have that insight. So I am so delighted that we could spend this time with you, Leticia. You're just like a lotus, you've just blossomed and
Absolutely. And Leticia, is there any way you can point our listeners if they want to see more of your work, or do they just Google you? What's the best way to find out what you're up to, or if there's anything you want to promote right now?
Oh, so let's see. So yeah, you could definitely find me on Twitter and Instagram. That's where I post a lot of my articles and my recent writing works. And my Instagram and my Twitter handles are both the same. So it is Leticia_Wright. So it's spelled LETICIAWRITES. The articles that I've been writing recently about, I did a most recent article on Herb Green, who was a photographer in the 1960s, and he photographed Grace Slick and Janis Joplin just before their stardom, and he captured so many great images of the era, just kids, high school kids, young adults who enjoyed living in the city, or like living the summer of love. And that was a really fun article to write about. And I've gotten to cover artists as well. And modern music nowadays is kind of going back in retrospect to the 1960s, like whether it be the sound or like even the fashion on stage. It's really making a comeback. And one of those artists that I was fortunate to interview was Pearl Charles. Michael Ralt, and they're just incredible artists who are same freedom of the 1960s and like the sounds, the crumb bar and like the steel guitar and like mixing like disco music with a little bit of a country and like a soul sound. So I've interviewed them as well, and you can read that article in my Twitter account. And then if anybody is interested, I also post my link tree, my most recent works there.
And I feel fine. I feel fine. It's hard to know why I ever resisted anything before. Didn't I know that love was more than just a feeling between two human beings stranded on the shore?
And, you know, I'm really excited for the work that I have coming up. And, you know, I'm so glad that I was able to talk with the both of you, because it's something that, you know, I've always talked to other people about their passions or like their careers and their lives. And, you know, speaking a little bit about mine, hopefully encourages other people to find out what hobbies they like, or what, if they want to pursue a writing career or a journalism career, you know, to try it out and see how it works. And, you know, hopefully I've inspired other people to keep on trucking and keep on going and never give up.
That's fantastic.
Thank you, honey.
We look forward to reading your work and seeing what you do next as well.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys.
Lots of love to you, dear.
Same to you, Donna. It was a pleasure talking with you again. I'm so happy that, you know, we were able to discuss some more, because it's been several years, and I'm so glad we were given this opportunity to talk again and share a little bit more about our lives and, you know, just love and self-love. And it's just wonderful, and I'm so thankful.
Lots of love to you and your family and where you live.
Much love and hugs to you too.
Bye-bye, lovey.
Bye-bye.
Yes, love.